Fate Zero is well known for its spectacular fights and visually appealing magical abilities, such as Iskander's reality marble, Gilgamesh's constant onslaught of noble phantasms known as the Gate of Babylon, and of course, Sabre's iconic Excalibur. There are countless well-made fights found within this anime, to the point that the combat alone would make this worth a watch. However, Fate Zero is not all about the flashy fights, and well, one of the greatest fights in the series would have to be Kiritsugu versus Kirei. You really have to ask yourself, what makes a good fight? Although, this is quite a subjective question, with many valid answers. Perhaps a good fight is where either side can believably come out as the victor. Or perhaps it's all about the fight choreography, or maybe how well utilized the special effects and soundtrack are. In reality, these are all rather important aspects of any fight, but to me, a single fight is much more like a short story that traditionally revolves around 2 or 3 characters. The fight should be able to convey who these characters are, what they stand for, what drives them, their weaknesses, their strength, and above all else, their personality as a whole. A fight is a way of quickly and effectively describing a character's personality without the necessity of a single word. All in all, this is a rather simple fight from an outside perspective. Neither of these men are servants, and as such, they will not be using any grand magics or noble phantasms of any sort. They are restricted to their own physical capabilities and whatever magical skills they have learnt. I'm hesitant to call this fight grounded, when it revolves around a murderous priest dueling with an equally murderous hero of justice, but in comparison to any other fight in the show, it becomes a little bit less of a stretch. This encounter had been built up from the very start. Of course, the very premise of the Holy Grail War requires for the masters to fight each other, whether directly or indirectly. Kiritsugu and Kirei were enemies from the very get-go. However, they both shared a deeper interest in one another for their own specific reasons. Kirei spends the majority of the series not understanding why he was chosen for such a magical war. Despite not having a clear aspiration or goal in mind, he was the one master that truly didn't have a wish that he wants granted in the event of him winning the war. However, once he learnt of Kiritsugu, Kirei wrongfully assumed that they were similar, and as such, Kirei became curious. What if they were to meet? Perhaps this encounter would enlighten Kirei on what his heart truly desired. However, from Kiritsugu's perspective, his fascination for Kirei was born from how much of an enigma he was. Kirei was a skilled mage killer and yet seemingly did not have an obvious goal in mind. A man without aspiration is rather difficult to both understand and defeat, especially when they are so technically skilled like Kirei. The Holy Grail War is won by whomever gathers the most information rather than who has the strongest servant at their disposal. Granted, it's pretty easy to say that when none of the summoned servants were exactly pushovers in a one-on-one fight, except for maybe Assassin. Back to the point at hand though, the fight. The Kiritsugu that we see in this fight is a fundamentally different side of the character that we have yet to see in the anime. Kirei was an unknown enemy that couldn't be as easily manipulated, unlike someone like Kenneth, for example. Kiritsugu was forced to think on his feet and execute a game plan that needed to be made up on the spot. This is evident from the fact that Kiritsugu shows a level of being surprised by how fast Kirei was. He was even able to land a solid blow onto Kiritsugu. That in of itself is an impressive feat to behold. Honestly, Kiritsugu seemed to have underestimated his opponents up until that very moment. However, he is quick to learn and adapt. If he wasn't, then he wouldn't have even made it this far in the Holy Grail War to begin with. Upon his recovery, the fight seems to have ever so slightly turned in his favor, as Kiritsugu became ready to use his origin bullets combined with his time manipulation magic to land a solid blow on Kirei, disabling his right arm for the remainder of the fight. This wasn't simply just a good shot, it was very telling of how Kiritsugu prefers to fight, through deception and withholding information. He actively chose to fire wildly at Kirei with his machine gun, giving Kirei the impression that his defenses were good enough against Kiritsugu's guns. This action produced a clear opening and allowed for Kiritsugu to gain the upper hand with his origin bullets. Perhaps saying that Kiritsugu now had the upper hand is a bit of an exaggeration when you go on to see that Kirei is just as dangerous as ever, even without the use of his right hand. He's able to keep up with most of Kiritsugu's subsequent attacks, aside from the odd kick or knife throw. This fight has gone on long enough, and well, both characters are starting to both understand and appreciate the strength and weaknesses of one another. Kiritsugu readies his origin bullets once again, whereas Kirei begins to use his trusty blades once more. They charge at one another, ready to end this fight, ready to announce the victor, he who would walk away to fight yet another day. However, that's where the beauty of this fight truly kicks in. We never truly get a conclusion, as it was interrupted by external events relating to the Holy Grail War. As such, the ceiling caves in on itself and marks the end of this fight between these two bloodied, desperate men.